Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Look, I tried to work in a little Christmas. Oh, a Christmas tree. Oh, it must be Christmas Eve. Is anybody else going crazy right now? I've got so much stuff to get done before tomorrow, having two little ones. Got all the gifts. And some of you sent gifts to my kids, and I want to say thank you so much. And so I've got to wrap my presents, and I've got to go pick up one more present and wrap presents and get a little work done today. But man, I haven't felt too Christmassy this year, but I feel a little Christmassy right now. So, Jolie, be good. Hello, Merry Christmas. Giving everybody just a few minutes, see if we show up. I don't blame you if you listen later because, my goodness, it's Christmas. Oh, don't forget to, good morning, Chris. Ho, ho, ho. What is it? This is my daughter's little Christmas tree. We went to Fred Meyer's to get tiny decorations, but they didn't have them this year. So she actually had that big tree hanging on there, but it was like, so I put it up there, that little big heavy tree. It's Christmas Eve. Now, when I was a kid, because my parents always had like Christmas service and stuff like that, we didn't do Christmas Eve service, we did Christmas service. So we always had Christmas Eve was our night where we opened up our presents, and then we would, like, parents would do like a show in the morning, and then we would have Christmas dinner. Sometimes we would go over to our neighbors and have Christmas, and that was always fun because our neighbor was a foot doctor. This is when I was a kid, and we had a little bit of money, and so the Christmas was a foot doctor, and I always felt like our parents were trying to outdo each other with the gifts for the neighbor. The neighbor's parents would try to outdo my parents for the gifts for them. And this was the 80s, early 80s. And so the podiatrist, Dr. Bakira, who lived next door, started these Doc Family Fun games, and he started a thing of arcades. He was getting in the arcade business early. And he won that year because he said, oh, when you guys go home, I've had delivered to your house a tabletop Tron and the game Jump Bug for you guys to, now it's not for keep forever, but for you guys to keep as long as you'd like. And so our neighbors won that year, the competition with the dads. I think my parents got the kids like really nice Tonka toys, Tonka trucks, and me and my sister got a video game from our neighbor. Anyhow, that was a million years ago, but that was a weird Christmas. Had a lot of fun Christmases over the year. Even the Christmases where my first Christmas visiting my dad in prison, and Sigmund Freud said that, you know, you'll look back at the days of pain, hurt, and sometimes see them with awe and wonder. He didn't say that exactly that way, but with fondness. And I can remember the first Christmas. And it was really tough. The visit was really tough. Visiting my dad in prison was tough, and they let us sit in this was the only time they did this. It was really strange. I guess it didn't work too well, so they didn't do it again, but they let us go into the chow hall and sit with our families in the chow hall in the prison. And the JCs, the prison JCs raised money so people could give their kids a little present, and so every kid got like a present and everything. But what was really interesting, when we went home, we had a tiny little tree in our hotel room, and it was me and my sister and her husband and my baby nephew James, who's a grown man now, and my mom and me, and we all did Christmas under this tiny little tree. And we had gotten food from, like the 7-Eleven or something. And we all just sat around and we were with each other. And it was like this very dark moment, but at the same time, I think it was like the first time we didn't have a TV show. The parents didn't have to put on anything big event or anything, but it was just the family. We were together. And it's wild with those moments, those small moments that bring you together. And it was really beautiful. It was really a beautiful moment. Yeah, so it's nice to be able to take some of that pain and reclaim it as positive, So that's, I think, one thing we can all learn is that, time can do beautiful things and allow us to see things in the past that may have been painful and even redeem the past in a way. So Freud was right there. What do you know? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Milo's like, "Are you a YouTuber, Dad?" I'm like, "Well, we do our service on YouTube." And he's like, "Okay," because like, if anybody ever sees weird comments on people eating hot spicy things from Revolution Church, that's my son. Sometimes I hear him saying stuff, and I'm like, "Milo, that's, you're speaking on behalf of the church when you say that." And he laughs and says, "Well, you should get me my own account." And I'm like, "I'm not getting you a YouTube account." But anyway, so there you go. I don't know why I was telling you that story, but oh yeah, because he's the one who always tells me to make sure I tell everybody, remember to like and subscribe, and turn on those notifications. There you go. Turn on those notifications and like and subscribe. Well, Merry pre-Christmas, Merry Christmas Eve, and as we all are probably running around like crazy trying to figure out what we're going to do. And it's weird because, like, I have the kids tomorrow and we decided to do the Christmas with their mom and everything. And it's also kind of strange when you have like the Christmases without the kids, And so, oh, you didn't remove yourself, so please, yeah, everybody make sure you subscribe. Listen to Chris. But yeah, so it's I've spent some Christmases in the movie theater, and I've done things like that. So for you that are spending Christmas alone or in the movie theater, we're with you. We love you. I'm glad you're here today. All right, so I'm gonna get the crap out of the way. Let's get the yucky stuff out of the way, and get into today's talk. I'm excited about today's talk. So I had a very close friend of mine recently tell me that that the fundraising, like the Revolution fundraising, seems a little bit strange. And so I wrote this down. I just wrote down this. I said, if the fundraising seems a bit desperate, that's because it is at this point. But that's okay, because you know what? We're going to finish the new year. We're going to finish the new year and start 2024 anew. This year was better. Hey, listen guys, last year, 2023, we're going into 2022. I mean, in 2022, I went 6 months, and I did this for free. I got paid to do work on the documentary, and so that's how I did my income in 2022. And I did 6 months doing this for free. So this year has been great because we have made payroll, we have made our bills and things like that. But I just want to make it clear, like, hey, yeah, last conversation I had with our financial person in New York, they said, hey, we're going to make pay, but we only have $14 left in the account. And that was it. And so if that seems desperate or weird, I'm sorry, but I also grew up in a weird world where raising money could be very manipulative, or a lot of promises and things like that. So that's where we're at. But I'm excited about the new year. I'm excited about today. And, If you want to send me direct messages and give me great ideas on fundraising, fantastic. If not, that's fine too. But we do this with your support. And it, the past few months have been kind of desperate. So there you go. Transparency. That's all I got. That's all I got. All I got. Here I stand, transparent with you. So I was thinking about, and I've thought about this in the past, and I think you've heard me discuss this in the past, as we talk a lot about arguing well. And what I want to talk about today is arguing well versus disagreeing well. And you might say, well, Jay, what's the difference? Well, when you disagree with somebody and you have a disagreement, it's one thing. When you argue, it's a little more intense, a little bit more, no, I think this, no, and I find that it's probably more difficult, in my own experience, to argue well than it is to disagree well. Arguing in itself, there can be a lot of passion. We want to get our point across. We can talk over the other, that type of thing. And you might be saying, Jay, why is this a Christmas Eve service? Aren't you supposed to talk about the star and the baby Jesus? Well, a lot of us will be with family members and other people this year. And someone will just, be bored watching a football game and be like, hey, who's everybody voting for? Something like that comes up and then it goes haywire. So I was thinking we probably should think about how we argue well or how we disagree well and that type of thing. So I think, and I believe that at this point in this type of teaching is that we should definitely start with disagreeing well. So I think disagreeing well is what we're going to start looking at, and I'm going to try to start using that term a little bit more rather than just arguing well. And I'm speaking this from my own experience and some experiences I've had recently that have taught me that, are you ready for true confession? True confessions is that I need to work on my arguing skills. Now, my disagreeing skills are a bit different. I think I'm a little bit better than that, but my disagreeing skills. And I'm going to start with the verse from Jesus in John. And John is probably not my favorite gospel. It's a bit wild. It's a bit crazy. It's a bit nutty. It's a bit different than the other gospels. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have been still doing this study on hell. Why during the week. Wild stuff. Oh, and I got a concept and idea for next week as well. And I'm hoping to do a little bit of talk out of the book of James next week. So gear up for that. And then, of course, January, we start our study on Galatians, our famous. So I've really got to start laying down because I've got some new commentaries and some new scholarly books on Galatians that are like kind of mind-boggling as well. So we got a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff coming up. The end of this, still left in this year and coming up in the next year. But at the Last Supper, the last dinner, Jesus was talking to his disciples. And wow, Chris says one of my favorite books is James. That's wild because James I've always struggled with. And, Martin Luther tried to get the book of James taken out of the Bible. But I've really come to love the book of James, and for a lot of different reasons. And it's really interesting because, that whole faith without works thing used to drive me crazy. But now I view it in such a different way. It's really beautiful. Okay. But we're in John right now. John 13:34. Where Jesus says, and if you have any history with Revolution, you've probably heard me use this verse before. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And I honestly don't think we realize how tough of a commandment this is in so many ways. Like Jesus said, I want you to love each other, but I want you to love each other like I love you, And it's knowing timing. It's knowing when it's time to argue well. It's knowing when it's time to disagree well. And it's also knowing when to speak hard truths and also when to show compassion and when to show repentance. I mean, if you think when Jesus was with the woman at the table and Jesus was being kind of a jerk and he's like, well, you want me to give, crumbs to the, you want me to give what God meant for these people to the dogs? And the woman said, well, even dogs get crumbs from the table. And he's like, your faith has made you whole. And we see in that moment a repentance in Jesus, a moment of clarity, a moment of, oh, these folks out, the outsiders, the Gentiles, they got something and they've made me realize something. And it's really a beautiful moment. I know everybody thinks that Jesus just never changes his mind and always got everything right. But in that moment, it doesn't appear to me that he was being right on there. It felt like he was being kind of cruel. And this woman goes, well, even, and she pushes back. And you learn even it's time for us to change our minds, time for us to have repentance and change and think like this. So, but all of that, it comes in within love. We have different types of love. You have romantic love, you have friendship love, you have family love, and we're going to talk about all those just a little bit today. But he goes, but everyone will know that you were my disciples if you have love for one another. And I think if we're all being honest, we all think about how Christians are seen in most of the world, especially in the United States and probably Europe as well. Probably not seen as the most loving people in the world. Probably not known for our love for one another. And I think that's why I think it's so cool to see how people remember my mother as they remember her for her love for others and her love for Jesus, and I also think it's great, like, that's why I always talk about Dr. King and things like that, is because that to me is the foundation of the message of Christianity is love each other. And this obviously was probably not a very new commandment, but I love it how he frames it in that way. That you love one another just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. Like how the repetitiveness of this command is really beautiful as well. But, there's a kicker to it as well. Here, and we're going to have to look at the kicker. And I'm going to go all the way back. Let's see if I can find it. I put my kids... So I lost my Bible. I don't know if I told you guys that last week, but the Bible that I've been studying in for 15 years fell out of my backpack. And of course I had spray painted it and stuff like that. So I'm sure somebody saw it and was like, oh, this is really cool. Or, oh, this is heresy. It must be burnt. But I had all my markings and writings and notes and stuff. So it's it's starting fresh. So for me, this is even next, 2024, our 30th year anniversary, I'm even starting raw with a new Bible. I have to lay out a new map for myself. Because it was always having my highlights and stuff were kind of like having a cheat sheet. In Proverbs 17:17, it says, a friend loves at all times, and kinfolk, this is the Beverly Hillbilly version of the Bible, and kinfolk are born to share in adversity. Now, if you're anything like me, you think, well, that's kind of changed, hasn't it? It's almost like a friend is almost the one who is here for adversity, and the kinfolks are kind of forced to love us at all times. It almost seems reverse, right? But what I'm trying to say here is, I've always this Proverbs has always stuck out to me. I think Proverbs was the first book in the Bible I read, and I remember thinking it was like little fortune cookies. A friend loves at all times, and the kinsfolks are born to share in adversity. what I found is with this loving God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, and loving each other, and we'll be known for our love for one another. Um, is it's hard to argue with those you love. I think it's harder to argue or disagree well with those you really care about and that those you really love. Now, I say this as a recovering people pleaser. I went through lots of therapy most of my life because of just mental health stuff and growing up the way I did. But the past couple of years, I did a couple of things that really, really changed me, and that would be dialectic behavioral therapy and then going to psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis was really a game changer for me and really helping me learn to accept myself. But also getting out of this kind of constant need to please people, and to allow myself, never say no, or just, oh yeah, sure, oh, I just go with the flow. I'm easy peasy, And I think with a lot of people who've known me in the past now see like this, me saying no or me pushing back on things. They're like, whoa, what's going on, And I can't blame them, because if you're with somebody and then all of a sudden they're kind of changing and they're a little bit different, you're kind of like, hey, what's going on in there, And a lot of it has to do with learning my own self-worth and having my own self-respect and learning who I am. And so that can be tough for a lot of us. So here's the kicker is that, well, I've got to, loving your enemy in some ways, like I would say, like if we love our enemies and we're going to go with our enemies and we're going to disagree well, and if we're going to make it to the next point and argue well with our enemies, it might be a bit easier to actually do. Some people say, well, Jay, I can't love people who don't recognize my humanity. Or I can't do this, But you might find it actually easier to have conflict with those folks because there's an obvious moment of disagreeing. There's an obvious moment of, there's obviously something that needs to change. And, so it might be easier to have those conversations. And so this has been very, something that's been more difficult for me is to do that. It's harder for me to disagree with those who are closest to myself. And so I think a lot of you might find it's harder to disagree with those you are closest to and not hold on to that pain and not hold on to that anger. And so, I can argue with someone who I'm disagreeing with about gay rights or, about even politics or things like that. And, if we're not close, the chances are that that maybe that'll be our even our meeting point, our unique friendship might be built on these disagreements, is how we're trying to work these things out. When I've met with pastors and people like that in the past and said, hey, I hope you could consider being affirming, and oh, we don't know, we've had a few meetings together and talked together, and so this disagreeing wasn't as hard as maybe disagreeing with someone I've had a relationship my whole life, a friendship my whole life, and then said, there's something wrong here, and we're disagreeing, and it's tough because we care about each other. It's tough. And so I want to tell you this little story that my friend Pete told me. And why I'm using this as an example is because last week I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and we were having a disagreement. And my buddy who I was disagreeing with is like this really great communicator. And he's really a great arguer. And I was arguing. And I realized I wasn't as great of an arguer because I was walking all over his words, stepping on, hey, but you don't understand. And have you ever, and I was like, wow, here's something that I talk about every week and try to discuss about how we can disagree well. And I'm not doing it as well as I could. Now, just so you know, the conversation ended well. And ultimately we did disagree well. But it was tough. It wasn't easy. And it was arguing. It was more than just disagreeing. And so that's when I was thinking like, hey, I need to go back to church, to Revolution, and say, hey, we should probably think about like maybe disagreeing first is the best way. The best is allowing ourselves to disagree and learning to control ourselves, at the same time take care of ourselves as well as watch our own, because when you argue with somebody and if it ends badly, we can carry that with us, and it's not the best self-care in the world, and you have all these emotions and these mixed emotions that happen and go on and things like that. I think that's part of loving people. I think that's part of having relationships with other people. If any of you have been divorced and had kids, and then you stay, so you stay together and you have to work things out, and it takes time. It's taken me and my ex-wife 4 years, 5 years to really, get to a point where it's like, oh, we're just kind to each other and we're rooting for each other, and and we raise the kids a little bit different, but we respect each other's ways of how we do things. Those are all different ways of learning to disagree and grow in that. And arguing isn't always the best answer. Sometimes just learning to like, hey, I don't agree with that, and this is why, and having a good conversation. Also, because what I've talked about with arguing well is that we listen well. And I feel like we really have to have control of our tongue and control of our emotions if we really want to go into an area to really argue with other people. And so in a way, it's like it's keeping ourselves in check. And it's doing that not only because we're trying to love our friends, but we're also trying to love ourselves and not put ourselves in a situation that is even tougher. So I think these are things worth questioning. These are questions worth asking, and things worth talking about. Because I think you've got to make sure there's self-care in there as well. And I think that's why Jesus said, like, love your neighbor as yourself. Being a people pleaser, you're going to build up a lot of resentments, but also being constantly angry and arguing, you're going to build up, so you have to kind of like walk a line sometimes, because you're mine, I'll walk the line. And these are things that we learn through relationships. And I've learned through years of counseling, but also through relationships. And so I think those, I think those who lord over us will always be a little bit easier to disagree with. Those who lord, or those who are causing, we can say, hey, that's not right, hey, that's injustice, or hey, you got to treat me, you should pay me better, whatever, whatever the thing is, it's easier to kind of do that than it is with someone you love with. So this story my friend Pete Rollins told me about is about this tribe where everybody in the tribe they took care of each other. It was almost like a communist tribe. But let's just say this tribe's in the middle of the world. And so you have people who fished, and people who hunt, and people who clean, and people who build, and everybody's doing this thing. But there was one guy who was doing nothing. But he would eat with everybody. He would live in his house. He enjoyed everything everyone else involved, and he was a part of the community, and everybody knew him and loved him and cared about him, but they started to build resentments because he wasn't pulling his own. And so they all had to get together to decide, well, what are we going to do about this guy? And so they had the meeting, they got together, and they made their decision, and so they went and they killed him. Now, when I first heard this story, I was like, I don't know if this is the best example. Like, I don't like this example. But the point is that for them, it was easier to get rid of him and kill him and mourn him than it was to confront him. They didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to deal with the anger. They didn't want to argue well. They didn't want to do it, so they just killed him. And that's often what we do with people in our own lives, is we cut them out, kick them out, get rid of them, because it's just easier for us to do that. And I say all this to point out that I use this example, this story, a parable, if you will, as a reason of just pointing out, like, this love thing isn't for the faint of heart. Loving others and caring for people is not of the faint of the heart, and especially loving those you're in relationships when you're growing and you're changing, and maybe your political stance change, or maybe they think differently about the COVID shot or whatever. All these different things that we've been taught to like have these reactions of these. The media said, black and white, we got to think this way, you got to do this, this, and there's, no nuances, because the media doesn't, get commercials out of nuances. And we go straight to war. And war is horrific. And so the absence of conflict is not peace. The absence of conflict is war. And so loving people, there's going to be conflict in that life. And so we've got to learn how to handle conflict. One of the things that's really helped me a lot was I learned in 12-step program and also in dialectic behavior therapy, one day at a time really helped me a lot, just to kind of keep that mind going. But there's this thing in dialectic behavioral therapy called radical acceptance. And you find yourself in a situation that is just really bad, really tough, and you can't really change in that moment. And it's going to take time. And it sucks. And being in those moments can be really tough because you're just like, I just want to make a decision. I just want to tell this person to go to hell, or they're not my friend. I don't love them anymore, or leave me alone, or, kick them out and end this thing. And I'm not saying that those aren't times, but as you've seen with Revolution, we've only probably asked one or two people in all of our 30 years to not come back. So because that's the hard part of loving. And love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, endures through every circumstance. When you think of Corinthians 13. But there's also self-care, and that's one of the reasons we had, hey, this is hurting the whole community, so we have to make this decision. It's not easy. So these are important things, is for us to say, all right, well, maybe it's time for us, arguing well might be a fast place to jump. So disagreeing well. So how can we disagree with others? How can we learn to say no and be okay? And the great thing about my buddy who I was arguing with, he's a very type A person. And we had the conversation, and he knows that I'm a little bit more I hold on to things and I worry about things. And, he said, listen, once this conversation is over, I'm going to go back to my life. I'm doing all my other stuff. I'm not going to carry this with me. So you need to know that. And I know he said that because he knows that I needed to hear that. And I did, because I would worry oh, but I said this, and oh, I did this, and oh, I did, And I think that's one of the things of learning to disagree well, is learning to let go in the disagreement. Even if it comes to a place of we've agreed to disagree, is that we really learn to radically accept that moment and still allow love to exist in our life, and to give ourselves some peace, so we're not just running over the conversation. We're in the shower arguing again and thinking about it, or thinking, oh, they hate me. I saw this this meme, and it says if I was in Alice in Wonderland, and it's Alice and it's the cat, the Cheshire Cat. And the Cheshire Cat goes, we're all mad here. And Alice goes, at me? So there's a lot of us who can relate to that type of is everybody mad at me? And so we have to learn to kind of accept those moments of disagreeing, and that's part of love. That's part of a relationship. We don't need to be like those members of that tribe who said, well, we'll just kill him because we don't agree with him. We're gonna die to ourselves. We're gonna pick up our cross. We're gonna die to our flesh. We're gonna have the argument and say, hey, we need you to do one of these, maybe fill in here. Is there something going on? Do you not feel comfortable with what we've asked you to do? Maybe you can help build the houses instead. Maybe you can do this. Rather than just saying, well, let's just conflict avoidance at its greatest. And I just think conflict avoidance doesn't help any of us, because we don't grow from that. And we need to grow, because there's so many horrible things happening in the world that we need to have tough decisions and have tough arguments and but we also need to realize that we've got to give ourselves grace within those times, but we also have to give others grace. It says, be ready. The Bible talks about be ready to give an answer, but do it in a gracious, kind way, And so I don't think we can look at traditional Christian ways of dealing with issues, because, I've seen my whole life where, I think about my buddy Carlton Pearson, who we recently lost. He came out and said, I don't believe in hell. Everybody just left him. And I asked him, were there people who checked in on you and things like that? He's like, not anybody who worked with me in that time. No one asked me if I was depressed or wanted to kill myself or anything the people just said because they couldn't handle conflict, they just had to be like binary thinking, you're in or you're out. And that's just not Christianity. That's not this faith. That's not how it works. And I'm grateful for people who show me grace as well. And also remind me sometimes that I need to show grace. Because just because I preach grace and I talk about arguing well, doesn't mean I have a corner on it. And I wish more pastors would have told me that kind of thing growing up, because I always thought these people had it figured out. And I would go thing on Sunday and how do I ever get that? That's impossible, And sometimes it does feel impossible. So I don't want to hold a grudge if someone says, well, hey, I don't think you're practicing what you're preaching, or I don't think you're doing this. And I can either go like, yeah, you know what, you might be right there. Or I might push back and then later find out they're right and go back, hey, you know what? In the long term, you made a good point. But the great thing is as I've become more comfortable in myself as well, there's times where I'm like, that's just their opinion. And it doesn't change anything. And if I don't find that that's somewhere that I need to change, then I just stay with who I am and go, hey, thanks for your opinion. I see that we don't agree on this subject, and I just move on, So like today when I said, hey, this is, if I seem desperate raising funds, guess what? We are desperate raising funds. The reason I said that is because someone said maybe I didn't need to seem so desperate. But the fact is the reality is that, hey, that's where we're at. And so I want to be transparent and I want to be honest with people I work with, which is all of us together in this community. But there are other things I realized, hey, there are other situations that I did in that same conversation that I was having last week, where I had to go, hey, I had to call somebody and go, hey, or text them. I texted them because we weren't the person we were talking about. I said, hey, you know what? I misread that. I was wrong. This was the first time dealing with a situation like this. You have to forgive me. And you know what? And then go from there and go, all right, I've done what I can now. I've got to move on with my life. If there's still issues there, that's not about me, because it's not always about us, folks. Matter of fact, most of the time, it's probably not about us. And so that's something I think that's really positive to remember. But if you've ever wondered why Jesus and Paul and the book of Peter and why then First John and all these guys are so desperately talking to us about love, loving others, loving our enemies, loving the poor, and even loving our enemies, and why Jesus rebukes these people, but people are like, oh, he rebuked the Pharisees and he rebuked the tax collector. But Jesus had a tax collector in his group. Like Matthew was a tax collector. Oh, well, he rebuked the Pharisees. Paul, the apostle, was a Pharisee. So, we've got to look at those things and go, okay, what happens when we learn to disagree well and when we change, and when we can look at things differently? Matthew happens. Apostle Paul happens. These are the type of things that happen, and then the Apostle Paul comes and says, oh, no, there's no Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, nor male nor female. You get what? This is grace begins to reproduce. Grace begins to grow, and you see grace in all these different areas. And so you give yourself the grace to be honest with people. You give yourself the grace to do that and sit with that situation. And you also give yourself the grace for time. And time sometimes says, hey, maybe you should have looked at that differently. That was another thing I liked about the 12-step program, is that you would sometimes go back and make amends to people and say, hey, when I was doing this stuff, I really hurt you, and I thought you were hurting me, and it was really me, and I need to make amends. So you we learn to grow as human beings. Christianity isn't just like, well, let me see what the answer is. Oh, there it is. Okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. It's not that. The Bible is a book about living and growing and changing. It's not an answer book. It's not a law book. I mean, it's truth, it's fiction, and it's contradiction. It's all different stuff in there. And we talk about that, And, but these are ways we can learn to kind of grow a little bit more. And so I want to let you know that you're not only, when I say this stuff, it's not only you working on it, I'm working on it. It's like someone who talks about grace as much as I do, you might find has probably struggled most of their life to give grace either to others or themselves. And with me, it's been to myself. And now I'm starting to give grace to myself. And that's a really beautiful place to be. And it even gets better is when you're allowed to have enough grace for yourself that you can love others who don't like you. You can love others who even hate you, because you start to realize, like, this isn't about me. This is about a deeper fear that they're dealing with. So in order for me to really love them is to kind of speak truth to them. Is not to kind of, is to speak truth to them and to help them free them of this misinformation that they have about why they may think they hate me. But this is not really what they're hating. There's something in themselves that is not allowing them to accept me because they're afraid or they're scared or they're insecure, you know, or they just haven't learned to live well with life. They haven't learned, don't have great coping mechanisms. They don't have healthy coping mechanisms. And so you have more grace for people when you do that. I need to get a Bible stand because I'm just like juggling books here. Colossians, I think it's 3. I don't think I've done Colossians in a long time. I'll put my Bible upside down. Here it is. And see all my bookmarks are here. My son's really into Pokemon cards. And my daughter goes in and out of it. And I think we got to look at a new reading of this in a way too, because I think if you grew up in old time religion, there'll be a lot of things that are like spark here, and like a lot of things that have been used as weapons. You know, how we weaponize the scriptures. You know, so, but here we are in Colossians 3, and we're going to start at 1, and then we're going to go all the way to 15. So you have been raised with Christ. Seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated on the right hand of God. Okay, Christ seeks the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. Now, hold on, because it's not saying we become so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever is in your earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming to those who are disobedient. Now, I want to say, like, growing up, the wrath of God to me was hellfire and brimstone and all this horrible stuff that, like, a lot I don't associate with anymore. A lot of it I don't believe anymore because of really tough studying and good scholarship to come to a lot of these points. But a lot of these verses I say here, like if I hear like God's wrath or things like that, in the past was like this just horrifically horrible triggering thing. And that's not how I see it anymore. You know, I don't, you know, it's like if my kid does something and I sit down and we have to have a hard conversation because they've done something wrong at school or something like that, you know, I see it more like that, you know. But we've heard these verses used in such a way to control people and to control congregations and to put fear into people. And so we have to kind of unlearn some of that way of seeing the Bible. These are the ways you also once followed when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things. Now listen to this. And obviously all these things are almost impossible to get rid of, but what it's saying is like we got to check some of these things in our lives. And I think this goes a long way with disagreeing well. You must get rid of such of all things. Anger. Now think about how any of these do us justice within disagreeing well or disagreeing with others. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices. You have clothed yourself with a new self, which is better, renewed in knowledge according to the image of its creator. It is renewal. There is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian slaves are free, but Christ is in all, between the slaves and the free and barbarians. So Paul's kind of saying some of these very similar things. Paul can sometimes be a one-trick pony, which I kind of love about Paul, because feel very similar sometimes with my own work about talking about grace my whole life. But what Paul is saying here is we're all one. There's no hierarchy. There's no lowarchy, but just bullarchy, molarchy. And I have clothed yourself with a new self. And when he's saying this new self is that we must get rid of anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another. And he's saying that's the old self. So when we're in these situations and we're angry and we're using wrath and we're using malice, and I especially say the bad language, and I think it's fine for friends, but if you love each other, know each other. But if you're trying to talk to someone about like why we need, equal rights for these people, or, Medicare for all, things like that, probably throwing in a shit in a dam isn't the best way to do it, unless you're like me and kind of crazy. But I don't recommend it, because then you go, oh, I shouldn't have said that, because all they're thinking is like, he said. Choose your battles. Malice, slander, abusive. So what is Paul telling us? Paul isn't saying like, now stop going to rated R movies and reading those books that you read, and stop being a Democrat or a Republican. No, it's not saying that. What it's saying is if we see these things in other people, we know that there's something a little bit off. But when we see these things in ourselves, it's time for us to go, oh, I need to take a step back. Maybe I'm not even ready to disagree well right now at this point. Maybe I just need to pray for them and be from afar. Like if I'm full of wrath and I'm full of malice and I've got to slander this person, you see that so often with this binary thinking. You see it so much in politics, and you find out like too that like it's not really there, where they do it a lot for TV, like pointing and talking crap about each other. But I've met with people who do work with AIDS and things like that, and meet with these politicians, and they're all conservatives and Democrats all in the same place, and they're all eating meals and talking with each other. But for the cameras, it's just, oh, and they're horrible, and they kick their mother, and all this stuff, and they slander each other and go, oh, how could you trust a man who does that? Or how could you trust a lady who says, and they slander and they abuse, and they lie about one another. You see this, and you see it's like completely like giving stillborn children. It doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't do anything for us, So I think what's great about this is it's saying like, look at these things of, if in pure passion and desire and greed and, this is what you're coming after, if this is what you're trying to win with, if there's anger in these, this isn't the way. So what I'm saying is there is a theology, or just there is words in this Bible that encourage us to see people differently, to see ourselves differently, because I think often we can be angry at ourselves, and we slander ourselves, and we can be abusive to ourselves. I know this firsthand, but we do it to others. And that's not what Christianity is supposed to be at all. That's not what this faith is about. And I don't think that's what being a decent human being is about, much less a Christian, is that I don't want to be, if you're around somebody who's constantly angry and hurting and devouring and tearing apart other people, we often have the idea of like, gee, I wonder what they say when I'm not around. I wonder what they say to other people about me. And so I think this is a great way to look at it. In 12, it says, as God chosen ones, holy and beloved. Now, Paul's taking this up and saying we're all God's chosen. Everybody's included here. That's what Paul's saying. Paul never mentions hell, ever. It's really weird, really wild. And we're going to do another study on that in 2024. But as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, which is all of us, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you. you know. And I think forgiveness is not something like we all have to work on and accept. I don't think it's a good magic pill. Like it's something, like there are certain people from my childhood that I've had to forgive a million times over. You know, doing this documentary brought up a lot of old pain, a lot of old hurts, you know. And I had to talk to this on the phone with this gentleman who worked with Falwell, Jerry Falwell, very close, and we had a huge argument. And I finally had to like just settle down and text him and say, "Listen, I'm sorry. I went there. Is there a way that we can communicate with more grace for each other?" And it wasn't easy, but that's the goal. So you all must forgive. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, and let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, to which indeed you are called, to be one body and to be thankful. You know, I mean, that really ups the game as well. That really ups the ante in so many ways. You know, you start to realize, like when you see church denominations and people talking horrifically about each other, they're not clothed in love. You know, and so it's what I unfortunately see is that we often find a lot of these people who are usually the loudest who weren't clothed in love, and go, "That's the problem. That's Christianity. Let's get rid of it." But when we come together, we read these other things that go, "That's not Christianity." But we're also going to have to say, like, we can't just get rid of them. We got to change. There's got to be change there. There's got to be, what's the word I'm looking for? We've got to restoration. Restoration. We are called to be restorers and to restore people, to restore our enemies, to restore those folks we disagree with, and also allow ourselves to be restored, because if we aren't restored and we are hurt and we're torn apart and we just become angry and bitter and full of malice, and then that becomes our situation. And then sometimes we'll lie about people because we're so angry at them we don't even know we're lying. We're just saying whatever bad thing we hear about them and repeating it. You see what I'm saying? So we get caught up in this thing. So you get like, "Hi, welcome to pissedoffxchristian.com. Like, let's talk about," you know, you're full of anger, you're full of hurt, you're full of malice, you know. Like, I think some of the best things we can do is just let it go. Sometimes we even have to just go like, "Hey, that person, that mega pastor, I'm probably never going to meet. I'm probably never going to talk to. So the best I can do is maybe people who've been influenced by that person or hurt by that person, I can sit down and go, hey, you know what? They probably grew up really different. Their theology is probably not that great, and it actually comes from this. And now that I'm doing scholarship, I can say, well, it comes from, you know, this denomination because they believed A, B, and C, and you're able to have a conversation with that. So sometimes you just have to let that person go and just give them to God. Lord, I can't handle it, so they're yours. Like I said, I am not a master at this. You know, so it's not only tough to stand up against our oppressors, but it's also really tough to stand up to, it may be tougher to stand up to those you are close to, who have been your refuge in the past, who you have leaned on, who you have depended on, who you have cared for, whether it be family or friends. It can be more difficult for us to have confrontation there and to have disagreements there. You know, so I don't know if that makes sense, but and I see some really great quotes from Michael saying some really great things, and that's part of that radical acceptance of sometimes you just have to living a life of gratitude and acceptance and things. You know, and you never know who's going to come across your path as well. If you're in the airport or somewhere, I've had some wild meetings with people. There was this writer I really liked who was doing these great, he wrote this really great book on, he came out of the closet and he wrote this really great book about it. And I hadn't met him, but I really admired him. And then one day when I was in New York, I stepped on the train, and there he was on the train. we chatted until their stop, and then we took a picture together, and it was lovely. And it's just that type of thing of, oh, well, we crossed each other's paths in the most wild way in New York City, and we both were on the same train, on the same car, for like 10 minutes, and wow, that was cool. So as I've come out of seeing my analyst, and I have been more comfortable being me, and it's not been easy, but I've realized it's not been easy for people close to me. I have boundaries, and I say no now, and things like that. And it's not always easy for people who've known me one way and now see me another way. And what I've realized is not just to be like, well, this is me. This is who I am now, because that's like the punk rocker angry part of me wants to come out and be like, this is who I am. But there's also the punk rocker who's like, we got to need a little bit of truth. And a little bit of truth is going like, hey, you know what? I've changed as a person. There's certain things about me that are different. And so this is not me just trying to be a jerk. This is just me becoming who I am and being comfortable in who I am. And there are plenty of systems out there that are corrupt and that we're going to have to, for lack of better words, fight against, or at least hopefully disagree with, and disagree verbally and disagree publicly with out there. That those relationships in our lives, even if those relationships come to the point of going like, hey, this friendship just won't work in this way, saying, okay, well, let's talk about that, and let's leave in a way that at least we know that there was love there, and that there's love, like there's a mutual understanding of like, hey, this isn't going to work, and often that happens in marriages and things like that, but in work situations and things like that, like, unfortunately, growing up, I realized every time someone would have to leave the church or quit or go on to something else, there was always like this break. Like my dad, like I remember telling me the story about when he was at the CBN, yeah, and he was doing the 700 Club, and he just felt called to move on and leave, and he did, and he went and met with them and said, hey, I'm not trying to take your folks away. I'm not trying to do this. I'm going to go start my own thing. I want to make the people of God greater and the church bigger of the world, American church or the world church, whatever they said. I just want to help more people and do it in another place. And problem is when he left, a few people were very angry and hurt. And so they erased all of his tapes that shows that him and my mom had made and done all these, and but I saw that growing up, is that sometimes we're so inept to even part ways and say goodbye. But that's part of growing up. That's part of being patient. That's part of learning life, and that people move on. And I remember when I was in high school, and all my friends were older, and they all went off to college, and I felt like they had abandoned me. They didn't abandon me. They went on to their new lives and learned. Then years later, we're all friends again and things like that. But in that moment, I was like, why are you abandoning me? So it's learning to live life on life's terms in a lot of ways, and do the best we can. And we were doing the best we can now. But my hope is the best that you can becomes even a little bit better after this conversation, after this moment, this time we have together, and that it even becomes better for me. You see what I'm saying? Like even I, after expressing this and being very honest and transparent with you today about my own struggles, that this is going to be something I recall the next time something comes up, because when I teach something, it sticks in my head. It's one thing to study and do all that stuff, but when I teach, then it becomes part of me. And so my hope is by being transparent with you and sharing my own struggles in arguing well and disagreeing well and things like that, that it helps all of us, our best become just a little bit better, and because sometimes our best is 40% and sometimes our best is 100%, and I hope this adds some percentage to our best and to our thinking, and even to the next couple days as we're walking into the holiday season. So yeah, there you go. Let's remember, let's start with disagreeing well. Let's get rid of our anger and our malice. At least let's try not to take that out on others. And let's ask ourselves, why am I so angry? Why do I have malice? Why do I feel these ways? And maybe breathe a little bit, take time, maybe take a day or two before you go. You said like, I remember that Bible verse was like, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Well, that's because they thought Jesus was literally coming like a few days. Sometimes it's okay to let the sun go down on your wrath because you've got to think about it. You've got to do the right thing and not be in this emotional state of mind. Because sometimes we go into arguments not even knowing what we want from the argument. Not even knowing what the end game is. So we're just arguing for arguing's sake. We just know that we don't like what that person said, but we really don't have an alternative to that except shut up or leave me alone or you suck. And those aren't answers. So these are good things for us to think about and grow in our own lives. So, all right. Well, I've got some Christmas wrapping to do and one last minute Christmas shopping to do. So I hope they give me some grace at the store today. Love you guys, and have a happy Christmas and happy holidays to whatever you may celebrate or not celebrate. And if you're going to the theaters on your own, make sure you get yourself sneak in some extra snacks. There, I'll give you grace for sneaking in the extra snacks. Oh, someone said it's a positive talk, and I didn't even think we did positive talks at Revolution. How strange is that? See, I needed to hear that. I needed the encouragement. So these words down here in your conversations and seeing you guys love each other and have these great conversations is also very inspiring to me as well. So thank you all very much. Goodness gracious. I will see you next week, and maybe we'll kind of reflect on this past year and throw out some vision and hopes for next year. Sometimes I don't like to put out too much vision because I feel like it just makes me anxious, and I've got to learn to not make myself too anxious. So thank you. Hey, once again, don't forget to like the talk if you can. I know that if you're not a YouTube member, you can't but like and subscribe, and put on the little bell that tells you when we come on, because sometimes we'll do surprise talks and you'll be like, ding ding, that's not Sunday. Oh, well, I should go look and see what's going on. But please like and subscribe to Revolution. It helps us a lot. And if you like what we're doing, and you heard the first part, we're nonprofit. We got $14 right now. Revolution does, so we could use your donations to make it into the new year. And you can do that by going to revolutionchurch.com, and we have Venmo and we have PayPal. So thank you guys so much. Have a blessed holidays, and I will see you. Well, we'll still be this year, so I don't get to use my cheesy dad joke yet. So I'll see you next week, and then I'll be able to use my joke then. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.